It's what Joe Biden likes to call a BFD, a big effing deal. On Wednesday, Senators Joe Manchin and Chuck Schumer announced a long-awaited budget reconciliation plan that would put more than $400 billion over the next 10 years towards increasing healthcare access, lowering prescription drug prices, and reducing carbon emissions by 40%, funded in part by higher taxes on big corporations. It's a plan that Joe Manchin was opposing just 2 weeks ago, and worth pointing out that it's a significantly pared-down version of the original $3.5 trillion package Biden asked Congress for last year. You remember the late, great Build Back Better, right? It also, the current deal, has yet to get through the Senate and the House. I mean, Joe Manchin says he's on board. Good. But radio silence so far from his fellow P in the obstructionist pod, Democratic Senator Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona. If it happens, it'll be good for Dems in the midterms. But will it be enough to cancel out all the harm that Manchinima have done over the past 18 months? Imagine a 50-50 Senate right now if the Democratic caucus hadn't been blocked by them at every turn. The Senate could have gotten rid of the filibuster, maybe, and secured voting rights and abortion rights. They could have passed a much bigger budget bill and done it almost a year ago. Remember, even Manchin and Sinema's fellow quote-unquote centrists in the Senate spent much of the past 18 months exasperated at the kind of things the two either blocked or killed, like expanded child tax credits, which expired at the start of the year. Listen to one of those centrist senators from Colorado, Michael Bennet, lamenting its end.
90% of the children all across this country directly benefited from a bill we passed here. We cut childhood poverty nearly in half. We cut hunger by a quarter for families with kids during a pandemic, which feels like a worthy thing to have done. We did it without adding a single bureaucrat to the federal government. We did it without adding one more federal agency. We proved we could do it. And then we didn't extend it.
The Colorado senator is now running for his third full term in office, and in a state Biden won by 13 points in 2020. Bennett's now warning of a tough road to November's midterms. He knows a thing or two about tough races. After his 2009 appointment to the Senate, Colorado's state GOP branded him an accidental senator, as Bennett had never held office. But the newcomer proved he was no accident, eking out a tight win for his first full term in 2010 and a more decisive 2016 win. This time, Bennett's up against Republican businessman Joe O'Dea, a man who beat out the insurrectionist candidate Democrats may have been hoping would win that GOP nomination. Bennett knows it'll be a tough race, especially when you're in the same party as an increasingly unpopular president who's been stuck leading a country during a pandemic, rising inflation, and a blocked agenda. Something the Colorado senator I know feels frustrated by. So how is the 2+ term Senator Bennett campaigning this time around? Where does he feel the Democrats have gone wrong, and what is he hoping voters see in him and in his party come November? Let's ask him. Colorado Senator Michael Bennet joins me now. Senator, thanks so much for coming on the show. As of Sunday, we're 100 days until the midterms. You're running to keep your seat, and you yourself have said it's going to be a tough race. What is your main message at this point in the campaign? What are you running on exactly, given you have a president in office whose popularity is at an all-time low? How do you work around that?
My main message is that we need an economy that when it grows for everybody, not just the people at the very top. For 50 years, we've had an economy, basically since Ronald Reagan became president and brought his trickle-down economics to Washington, D.C. We've had an economy that's worked really well for the top 10% and not for anybody else. And in Colorado, people can't afford a combination of housing, healthcare, higher education, or early childhood education. I'm fighting to change that. You know, we got to save this democracy. We need to create an economy that really works for families and gives people a sense that they're making a productive contribution to the economy and to the society.
And you've got this big reconciliation bill now on the table, thanks to the Schumer-Manchin deal on Wednesday. If the budget reconciliation passes, still a big if, it will be huge, yes, but will it move voters, I wonder? Because last November, Biden signed the big Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the BIF, into law. It was landmark legislation meant to overhaul the country's roads, bridges, broadband. You said at the time, and I quote, "We can reaffirm the American people's faith that our democracy can deliver change in their lives And yet Americans don't really know about this change you've helped bring about. A recent poll by the Third Way think tank found that most voters don't even know this happened. 30% think it's still being worked on. 37% don't know the status of it. Only 24% of Americans know it's law. That's a huge messaging problem for the Democrats, is it not? If a tree falls in a forest and no one hears it, no one's going to care about that tree.
You're right about that. That's what this 100 days is really about. I mean, there's almost not a weekend. When I go back to Colorado, which is every single weekend, there's almost not a weekend where I'm not doing something that has to do with infrastructure. And it's a great story. People come out, Republicans and Democrats from across the state. I think that will be true if we pass this reconciliation package as well. There are massive benefits for Colorado's economy and the climate provisions, the tax provisions for clean energy manufacturing, for example, and of course, the very important provisions that will dramatically reduce the cost of drugs and prescription drugs in this country. I mean, we're going to cap seniors out-of-pocket expenses by $2,000, and we're going to, for the first time in American history, Medicare is going to be required to negotiate drug prices on behalf of the American people. I can't think of anything we could do right now that would be more popular with the American people, especially when they're facing the kind of inflation they're facing.
So let me ask you this question. If you guys get hammered in the midterms, we all know there will be a kind of post-mortem, and there's already rows going on within the party between the various wings. There are those who would say, you know, there's a centrist, quote unquote, moderate centrist, you're identified as one. There's progressives like Elizabeth Warren, who I was speaking to yesterday. The progressives would say that Joe Biden and the Democrats were doing really well at the beginning of 2021 when they were doing lots of ambitious, radical, progressive things, the American Rescue Plan, sending checks out to people, spending money. And as they became more moderate and restrained, perhaps pushed by Manchin and Sinema, you became less popular. What is your response to that argument?
I don't agree with that. I think first of all, I'm not even sure I agree with the characterization of progressive versus moderate, but let's put that to the side. I think what we're dealing with here is we've got very high inflation. We've got very high gas prices. It's true all over the world, but that's cold comfort to people in Colorado that are paying $4.50 for gasoline. So we need to be able to have a conversation with them about what's caused this, the supply chain issues that we're confronting as a result of coming back from COVID, the energy prices that we're confronting as a result of the economy getting much better, and then Putin invading Ukraine. These aren't excuses. These are the facts. And my opponent in this race, who, by the way, has said that Donald Trump bears no responsibility for January 6th, who said he would have voted for every one of Trump's Supreme Court nominees, who says that he opposes the law that we've passed in Colorado to codify a woman's right to choose. He keeps saying the only number that matters is 9.1% because that's the inflation number. Well, the number is 9.6% in the EU. I'm not sure Joe Biden caused that problem. We have to be out there explaining this, and we have to win, by the way. I don't want to talk about postmortems today. We have to win. The democracy is at stake. This is not just about people being this is not just about the names on the ballot. And if you believe, as I believe, that the democracy is at stake, it means Democrats have a moral obligation to win seats in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Ohio and Colorado and Nevada. We cannot lose those seats, because if we lose them, we're going to lose them to people that don't actually believe in the democracy.
Yes, indeed. As we were just discussing earlier, you're right, especially in places like Michigan. Let me ask you this, though. You brought up, and by the way, on the post-mortem point, it's a fair point, but it's a pre-mortem right now because your party is already discussing who's to blame for what's going on. But let me just ask you this. You mentioned your opponent's views on January the 6th. I'm glad you mentioned those views because a lot of the polls recently show that Democrats' prospects for November have improved. And many would argue that's because of the January 6th public hearings. It's reminded people of the extremism and radicalism of this GOP. It's reminded people of the Donald Trump threat, which still exists. Isn't that an argument for your party to be much more aggressive about Donald Trump and about GOP extremism, which maybe you haven't been as aggressive about as you could have been?
Well, I think that I hope very much that what comes out of the January 6th hearings is that Donald Trump never has the chance to run for president of the United States. That is what I hope the result will be. I think for people like my opponent who's saying Donald Trump bears no responsibility for January 6th, I wish he would watch some of the January 6th hearings because he'd know that's completely untrue. And I do think the party is very extreme. I mean, you see it with You see it with Mitch McConnell saying he might pass a national abortion ban. You see it in the wake of the Supreme Court overturning Roe versus Wade. You see it in their inability to even vote to cut drug prices for seniors in this country, which is what we're doing right now. You see it in their inability to support provisions that are incredibly important to dealing with climate change. And I think above all else, you see it in a world where they want to double down on an economy that has worked only for the people at the very top and not for everybody else. I think every single Democrat can agree with the last thing that I said. Am I disappointed that we haven't reversed the Trump tax cuts on the wealthiest people in this country?
So,
absolutely. Am I outraged that the Democratic Party didn't fight hard enough for the child tax credit, which I worked on for so many years with Sherrod Brown, that cut childhood poverty in this country in half? I absolutely am. But now is the time to win these races. That's what we have to do now. We cannot afford to have Mitch McConnell become majority leader of the United States Senate. That would be a disaster.